Hi, and welcome to the second video in our PowerShell 7.2 for Beginners series. In the last video, we kind of went over some basic fundamentals. We found out what a commandlet was. We installed Visual Studio Code. We installed PowerShell 7.2.6. So now what we're actually going to be doing is we're actually going to be getting into some coding. We're not necessarily going to be scripting yet, but we are going to start learning the basics of how to write our scripts starting in this video. So what we're going to first want to do here is we're going to want to open up Visual Studio Code. And then all we want to do is click on File at the top left here, and then click Open Folder. And then we're going to go to the folder that you want to store this, this file in. I'm going to be putting that in C. And then I have a folder called scripts. And then I have one just for this video, 2 variables. And then in here, I'm just going to hit select folder. And then in here, everything's going to open up. It might take a little while. And then here, we're going to be creating a new file at the left, kind of at the top here, top left. We're going to hit new file. And here, we're just going to call this variables.ps1 since we're learning about variables today. And now it will take a little moment for Visual Studio Code to actually kick on the actual PowerShell like engine or core, you can say. So now if we actually do our set dash, we're going to see some commandlets. Get dash, we see some commandlets as well. So we know Visual Studio Code has loaded in PowerShell, so we are good to go. So the first thing with variables, they work the same way in PowerShell as pretty much every other programming languages. The only thing that kind of is different is how we declare them and a little bit how they work. So in PowerShell and any programming languages, really, variables are pretty much exactly what you remember from high school, middle school, or post-secondary math class, where you had algebra, you had to find the value of x, or they give you a value of x and a value of y, and you have to do some sort of calculation where x or y had a stored value. So variables are exactly in that same way in programming and in PowerShell. You can store them to values. The neat thing about programming languages or PowerShell is they don't have to just be equal to numbers. We're going to see that we could store names in there, which are actually called strings. So strings are a series of text or a series of characters that form a word, a sentence. Anything really wrapped in a double quote we're going to see is called a string. And then we could store number bit values, which these could be integers or they could be doubles. We're going to see what the difference is as well. And then we also have other variable types like Booleans, date, time, and so on. There's a bunch of different variable types. We're going to be covering the basic variable types today. And in the next couple videos, we're actually going to be looking at a little bit more in-depth variables that take a little bit longer to cover just because they aren't necessarily something that you would see outside of programming. So those are arrays, hash tables, and some custom objects. So let's actually go ahead and let's get started in seeing how we could use variables in PowerShell. So first I'm going to explain the notation that I use. So I use camel casing. So that would be a lowercase for the first character, and then any words that come after will actually start with a capital. So camel casing will be camel is the first word, so that would be lowercase, and then casting or casing, I should say. The casing would start with a capital C. Another example would be if I had my value, the my would be lowercase, and then the value would be uppercase for the V. So that is camel casing. But to declare a variable in PowerShell, you first start off with the $sign. That signifies that this is a variable. And we are going to say, we're going to name this my variable. And let's first assign it to a name. So let's assign that to JackedProgrammer here. And what we can actually say here, so we can run this line of code. So we can run it like this, or we can run it like this, as we've seen in the last video. Both will work. And then we can actually display it to the output by just actually putting my variable with the $sign in front of it. It doesn't equal anything. We are just putting it here. We will see that down here, it actually displayed JackedProgrammer. And if we actually just run it completely, we will see that we actually get it again here. So that is perfectly awesome. Also, if you want to clear this console here, because it's maybe getting a little cluttered, you can type clear or you can type CLS. And that will just clear it. And then we could just run it again, just so you guys can see it. Say fresh run, we get JackedProgrammer. Now, we know, or at least I know, and I'm about to tell you guys that this is what we call a string. So anything between double quotes is a string. We can even put the number 12 here. This is actually still going to be considered a string because it is in between two double quotes. Now, a string in PowerShell could be double quotes or it could be single quotes as well, as long as they both match on either end. That will be fine. We will see that we get the number 12. Now, how do I know that this number 12 is actually a string? If we do the my variable, and then we do a dot notation here, we actually see that we get a lot of different things that pop up. Now, these are what's called methods or properties, depending on what you pick. The length is a property, and that will actually be notated with a little wrench here. I don't know if you can actually see that clearly in the video, but the wrench are going to be properties. And then the little cubes here are actually methods, and methods are what you can run on a specific value. So there is actually a method called getType, and that will actually automatically put a opening parentheses. We're just going to close that parentheses right away, and we're just going to run this $myVariable.getType with the open and closing parentheses. And when we do that, we actually get an output here that it is a base type of system object. So it is an object and it is a string. So if we actually change this to just 12 here without the double quotes, and we actually run these, we actually get, now that we get a value type, and we get int 32. And this means integer, and it is a 32-bit integer. Now, if we added a .1 here, we will actually get a different variable type of, once again. We still get a value type, but it is now a double. So basically an integer is a round number. So 1 through, I believe it is around like 2 billion is the max value for an integer. I could be wrong on that as well. But it is a whole number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can also have negative values as well. So -1, -2. Those are all 32-bit integers in PowerShell. A double is when you have a dot or a decimal point in there. Now you can have as many decimal points as you want in here, and this will still be a double. Now, doubles would be more what you would use for like financial type applications or anything like that. If you're dealing with integers, you might be doing some basic comparisons, maybe some little bit of math here and there. But the majority of times your numerical values will probably be doubles. So that is pretty much it for integers and doubles, and we know how to find out the variable type as well. Now, very similarly to real life, we can use these variables in math functions as long as they are stored in integers. So we can actually do that here. So let's actually just erase what we have here. And let's create a couple variables here. So let's do a my value, and we're going to do a my value 1 equals 1. We're going to do another my value 5 equals 5, and then a my value 10 equals 10. Perfect. So we have 3 variables here, and we have all of them are set to integers currently. And what we could do is we could do a my value 1, and we could do a plus $ my value 10. And if we actually run all of this here, we actually get the output of 11 because we are adding 1 to 10. So that is exactly what you would expect. You would expect to get 11 back. So that is awesome. But also what you can do is you can actually store that result in a variable, and we're going to call that variable my result. So if we actually run this here, we will see that we actually do not get an output anymore. And that is because instead of being displayed to the screen, we stored that output to the my result. So if we actually just do a my result here and we just look at what is inside of this value, we see that we get 11. So that is perfect. Now, what happens if we try to get a value that has not been set yet? So let's say if we do a my result 2 and we try to get this, we actually just get an empty value, and that is because this is actually equal to null. We're actually coming back to that probably a little bit later on in this video, but just be aware that if you don't set anything to your value and you try to look at it, you won't get an error, but you won't get anything back. So that is just something to keep in mind. Now the other arithmetic or mathematical operations that you can do, of course, is the minus. So if we do 1 minus 10, we will see we get minus 9. If we do 1 times 10, we will see that we get 10. And if we do 1 divided by 10, we will see that we get 0.1. So it actually does convert it automatically to a double here. And then there is also one last arithmetic value or mathematical operation that we can do that a lot of people don't necessarily remember or know about, but we've already covered the 4 basic ones. The last one is this percent sign. And what this is, it is called a modulus or modulo or mod operator. And what this is it is the leftover function. So back in probably elementary school, you were taught how to do long division. And always with long division, you had a whole value and then you had a remainder. This modulo operator will actually give you the remainder. So if we do a 1 divided by 10, 1 doesn't divide by 10, so it should actually give us the value of 1. And we do get 1, so that is perfect. Now, what happens if we actually did, let's create another variable here. Let's do my value, and we're going to do my value 3 equals 3. And we're going to do my value 10 modulo my value 3. So we are doing 10 divided by 3, and we're getting the remainder of that. So 3 goes into 10 3 times, and we have a remainder of 1. So let's see what happens here. So we do have a remainder of 1. Now, what if we did a modulo 2? So I'm actually not going to create a variable. We're just going to put 2 directly in the operation here, which is completely doable. We actually get 0. Now, this could be something that you use to actually detect if something is even. The modulo operator is how you would do that. You would always do a modulo 2. If it is equal to 0, you know the number is even. If it is not equal to 0, then you know that the number is not even. So that's just something that you could do with the operators, and you can kind of do that for some conditional statements that we will actually learn later on. Now, what we can also do with values is we can have Boolean data types, as I mentioned. Now, the Boolean data types are simply true and false. So if we actually go and set here, my statement is equal to true, and let's just go ahead and let's do the my statement dot get type, open and close parentheses here. We just run these last two. We get a value type and we get Boolean. Now, as you can also tell, not sure how clear it will be in the video, but the my statement is a lighter blue than the $true. And it's because the $true is a preset value in PowerShell. If we do a $false, we get the exact same thing. And this is because this is already predefined. You cannot use the $true or $false as variables. If we do a $true equals 1, we will see that we actually get a value because we get an error, sorry, because the variable true cannot be assigned since it is a read-only automatic variable that is built into PowerShell. Please use a different name. So if you try to assign something that's already a default value in PowerShell, you will get an error message saying that you cannot do that. And this goes for true, false, and what we're about to see, which is actually null. So we actually have these Boolean values. Now you can actually get Boolean values out of conditional statements, or you can also kind of remind yourself of like back in math days where you had operations of greater than or equal than or lesser than. You would have a Boolean value that comes back out of that. So if we actually do here, parentheses, and we do my value is equal to my value 10, and we're going to run this here, we actually get false. And if we did a get type on this here, we will actually get that it is a Boolean as well. Now you don't have to actually know what the -eq here means, but it does mean just equal. We will be learning that a little bit later on. That's in a different video here. That's a little bit exceeding. But in a lot of languages, the equal sign to check equality would usually be a double equal sign or a triple equal sign. That actually does not work in PowerShell. So if we actually run this here, we will get an error saying that the term equal is not recognized as part of a commandlet. So you just have to know that to check equality, it is -eq, but we will have a whole video on these conditional statements, as long as you know that they exist. So as we saw a little bit earlier, if we have something like my new result and we run this, we get nothing back because we haven't assigned this value to anything yet. It does not exist. Now, in a lot of programming languages, if you try to reference a variable that hasn't been declared yet, you would get an error. Now, this is not the default functionality in PowerShell, but if you do want that default functionality, you can actually still receive that functionality. If we do a let me just do it at the top here because this is what you would typically set it up at the top. So if we do a set strict mode -version latest, and we just run this commandlet here, and we try to do my new result, we will actually get an error. The variable my new result cannot be retrieved because it has not been set. So this actually makes it as a strictly typed programming language, or at least making it to where you need to declare your variables and assign your variables before you can reference them. It will not let you just reference a variable that has not been declared yet and just automatically assign it to null. This will give it a more of a default programming language feel. But by all means, if you do not want this, by default, it does not come turn on. And if you do turn it on, you can always turn it off by set strict mode off. And then we can run this line. No problem. We see that it equals to nothing, which actually is a null value. Now, if you need to use nulls, for example, in your code, similar to the true false, we can also do a $null. We see that the color changes. So we can actually compare the my new result is equal to null here. We're just going to wrap this in parentheses. And we are going to run this. And we see that it is equal to true. Not just because my new result hasn't been set to anything, so it is actually equal to null. Now, if you had the strict mode set to on here, so if we do a version latest, and we try to check for null, you will actually get an error once again because this value cannot be referenced because it is null. So always be sure if you are using strict mode and you're getting a lot of issues, it might be easier to write your code without strict mode on. But if you do have the need to make sure that your code, the variables are always set, nothing is ever null, the strict mode could be very, very handy for you. So do know that it is an option for you. It's something that I did not know for the first couple years of me using PowerShell. It is something that I learned in the last couple years. So we know what the $null, we know about the strict mode, we know about the different operators, we know about Booleans now as well. Now the only thing left, which I didn't actually cover in the first variables video, is we can actually type our variables. Now what does that actually mean? It means that if I give a value, so we're going to come back to the top here with our integers. If I did a value of 1.2 here for the my value 1, if we just look at the my value 1 here, and we set it to 1.2, we get 1.2 back. And if we do a my value dot get type, we actually get a double, which that is perfectly fine because it is a 1.2. It's got a decimal, it is a double. But now let's say if I only wanted integers to be stored in this variable of my value, if I put a pair of square brackets in front of it and put int inside of that, and we run this code, just get the output, we actually see that we only get 1 now, and the type is now int32. Now, if we do the same thing for the my value 3, but this time we're going to set it to a double, and it's only set to 3 here. Just going to copy these couple lines here. So if we cast it to a double here, we actually see that we still get 3. It doesn't add a point or anything, but it is actually stored as a double. Now you might want to be a little careful. Doubles do take up a little bit more room than integers in your code. So if you are casting something to a double, make sure it actually needs to be a double. Or instead, you could always just leave it to the defaults. And this way, you are letting the system kind of figure it out and assign the types according to the variables. But you can actually assign a type to the variable itself. Now, one last thing that we're going to be looking at is we've seen commandlets and they output to the console as we've seen. So if we do a get date here and we run this, we get the date for today and the current time. And it's always outputted to the console. Now with variables, we can actually save this data to a variable. So if we create a variable here called today and we store that and we make it equal to get date, we don't get the date anymore in the output, but if we actually look at today now, we actually get today's date. So do know that you can store the output of commandlets into variables and then do some processing on this data. All these things we will be doing much later on in the course. This video is really just to understand how variables work. the different aspects of variables, the different data types that you can use in PowerShell. In the next video, we're going to be looking at arrays, and then we're going to be looking at hash tables and custom objects, because those are going to be very, very useful later on once we get into some more complicated scripts and some of the projects that are already on the channel. A lot of them use hash tables and custom objects and arrays. So you're definitely going to want to know how to use those. So that is pretty much it for the variables video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know down below in the comment section. If it's something that I think can benefit a lot of people, I will make a video. If it's something a little bit more specific, I will answer you guys directly. Always be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as well, and be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out, and I will see you guys on the next video.